Okay, I'd like to, on behalf of myself, Liz Feeney, Chair of the Chartered Accountants Ireland Northwest Society, welcome you all here today, and to thank you for taking the time out from your lunch to join our webinar. We have a jam-packed programme ahead of you, and delighted to be joined with well-renowned speakers. Anyone that is remotely involved in the insolvency business in Ireland would know Neil Hughes and Owen Healy from Baker Tilly. Neil's reputation would precede him, as he's been appointed liquidator to a number of high-profile cases, including Golden Discs and VF Cold Stores, and also appointed liquidator to a number of sensitive and very highly profile liquidations. Owen is Corporate Recovery Director and specialises in advice on business recovery. And both have published books. Neil has the 7 C's of Business Recovery, and both are co-authors of A Practical Guide to Examinership. They're going to be followed hot on the heels by Siobhan McSharry, who was a corporate solicitor in a former life, but has joined the ranks of Managing Director of one of the leading Northwest insurance brokers. And she called McSharry Foley solicitor, McSharry Foley insurance brokers, who specialise in PI and employer and public liability. Just some housekeeping. If anybody has any questions during the session, if you want to pop it into the Q&A, and we'll actually direct them to the member of the panel at the time they're speaking, if that's okay, to make it a little bit more interactive. I would also like to just say that the is being recorded, and also to thank Kathy for organising, and also to thank the local chambers for promoting, and Baker Tilly as well, and McSharry Foley for all attending. So with that, and without delaying any further, I'll let Neil take over. So if you want to continue, Neil, thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And thanks a million to Liz and to Kathy and everybody in the Northwest Society for the invitation. Always a pleasure to speak to the Society. It's usually, Liz, in the Radisson, I think is the normal kind of venue.
Yeah.
So unfortunately we're not there live and exclusive from the Radisson today, but we're all at home. But still, no, it's a real pleasure. And I know there'll be a lot of people on the call here who, like ourselves, like myself and Owen, will be accountants in practice and will have faced the challenges of the last 12 months. But, you know, guys, I think there's a little bit of optimism in the air because of the vaccination program. Like we, for example, one of my partners vaccinated yesterday. I know our partners, pretty much all of them in the Baker Tilly office in Belfast, are now vaccinated. And I think when it starts to get a little more close to home in terms of the vaccination program, when people that you're dealing with, your colleagues and so on, are slowly but surely getting vaccinated, there's this little bit of optimism creeps in, which I think means it's a really good time to start looking at the future, to start looking at a health check of your business, not just obviously your own practice, but the ability to take a health check of your clients' businesses. Because our role has changed, I think, as practitioners, something we've discussed on over the last while, which is, you know, previously we'd be advising clients as to, for example, how little can we pay the state within the law in terms of taxes, and then the job evolves to the point is, okay, how much can we take from the state in terms of subsidies? And we're going to be looking at some of those on in a few minutes, sort of have a kind of whistle-stop tour over all of the different subsidies that are available, just to make sure that your clients are getting everything that they can have. We previously were speaking to clients about what kind of growth would they have in the run-up to the pandemic, and then that switched to how is your business going to stay alive, taking into account the new environment we're in. So, and then finally, in terms of people, you know, we've been looking at the view that teams cannot be as effective as you know, when they're working from home, which would have been the prevailing view, say, before the pandemic. And now we have, you know, shortly we'll have a legal right for employees to work from home with a right to disconnect. I mean, it's just totally turned everything upside down over the last 12 months. So we think it's a really good time just to take stock, take a health check of your business, of clients' businesses. And that's kind of, I suppose, some of the background to our own discussion today. And just to be, I suppose, a couple of housekeeping points to follow on from what Liz said. Like, we're going to be really respectful of people's time today. We are not going to I made a mistake a few years ago speaking at a seminar in Limerick, slipped over time, and it was lunchtime as well, same as today. So, somebody put their hand up at the back of the room, and I said, excellent, there's a question. Here comes a question from one of the delegates. And his question was, when are you going to stop talking? He said, it's lunchtime. And, you know, he didn't care. He was just like straight out there. When are you going to stop talking? So we're going to be really respectful. We're going to try and finish up early, especially Siobhan. We don't want to trespass on any of your time as well. So we'll do our best to keep it really nice and tight. But as we go along, we're really happy if people did have comments or queries, that they would throw them into the chat so that we can try and deal with them live, because that gives a bit of a crackle of energy into the session. So please feel free to do that. We are going to start with just talking about the recovery mindset, which we think is going to be hugely important for us. Just a couple of intro slides there you can see in terms of ourselves and in terms of Baker Tilly. Our experience in Baker Tilly has been, I must say, reasonably positive over the last 12 months about how we've managed to get through the challenges of the pandemic. We put a huge amount of faith in the team in terms of, everybody going home. I came in here into the office to switch off the water, switch off the electricity back last March of 2020. So we put a huge amount of faith in the team to be able to keep going from home, and they repaid that trust. In fairness to all of the team members, they really repaid that trust. It was really, I suppose, a pleasant surprise to us that people could effectively work from home. I'm sure maybe others have other experiences, but that certainly was our experience in terms of getting through and trying to stay positive, which is something I'm going to come to now. Because that, I suppose, practical positivity is a really key part of the recovery mindset, which is, I suppose, the underlying theme of everything we're going to be talking about today in terms of just assessing your business or your client's business. You can see here some of the topics we're going to be covering. I'm going to start off with the recovery mindset. And myself and Owen are going to tic-tac over and back in terms of some of these topics here with about, I would say, 4 or 5 minutes on maybe on each one. And we're going to kick off with the recovery mindset. And a lot of that, in terms of the, I suppose, principles behind this, if you want to go into that on, I guess some of my experience acting as Honorary Secretary of Mental Health Ireland for 6 years, just up until last year, flows through. Some of those experiences have really flowed through into a business recovery. So in other words, personal recovery in terms of the journey that people have and some of the clinical pathways people have in terms of mental health recovery. The same themes flow through into businesses and into the economy itself. And that involves a practical positivity. It's positivity based on being in control, and that leads then to resilience. And when we're talking about practical positivity, we're talking about actual things that people can do where they feel like they're making a difference, that they're influencing the outcome of what the events are. Because sometimes businesses can slip into despair when they don't believe that they can, in fact, influence the outcome of what is ahead of them. And so this even goes to some of the things we'll be talking about later, where some of the restructuring options that inevitably a lot of sectors are going to have to avail of. And this is, I suppose, if all else fails. But even if you have a restructuring plan to work towards, that still puts somebody back in control. And where people feel they lose control, that's when despair can creep in, depression can creep in, not just for individuals, but also in terms of business, in terms of the economy and society. So I think some of those key principles, you're going to find that right the way throughout. It's control in terms of and sort of practical steps you can take in terms of the subsidies that are available, in terms of the refinancing options that are available. I think it's a responsibility on us. We have an obligation to our clients to be aware of the options that they have, to be able to, once they take that health check of the business, that they can actually then move towards to a better place, so that you're not moving the business from a rock to a hard place. You're actually moving the business to a better place because of the insight that we as practitioners can give them. So that's what we're going to look at now just in a second. So I think it's important, though, that we would keep in mind some of these themes about what it is that can lead to a business owner losing hope and I suppose slipping into that despair. And that's, I suppose, everything we're talking about, guys, today. Everything we're talking about is going to be about trying to help our clients and try and make sure that they are a success. So if you want to move on, Owen, maybe just in terms of what's up next, I think, will I hand over to you, Owen, for this? Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Thanks, Neil. So yeah, thanks very much for having us on today. It's really exciting to be able to present to you. we're just going to talk a little bit about this company best practice. I won't go into the slides just yet. So obviously, to reaffirm Neil's message of kind of hope and a brighter future, that we all need to look, only need to look across the water really at England, who are further along down on their vaccination program than we are currently. They've got a booming economy right now, especially in the hospitality space, in the areas that have been so depressed for the last 12 months. So again, more hope and positivity. The household savings in Ireland are currently at an all-time high at about 126 billion in January, and it's up 15 billion late last year. So households are definitely saving. So there's definitely a strong basis for healthy consumer rebound. Pent-up demand in the marketplace. I know I am. I'm itching. Me and Neil were talking about this recently. We're keen to get out there and do things that we haven't done in the last year. So there's definitely, whenever things do open up safely again, we'll be keen to be there. And obviously there is a huge demand in the marketplace for those services. And we'll all be tuning in this Thursday to see what our roadmap looks like in the recovery phase of this pandemic. So this slide effectively, so most businesses obviously would leverage off their particular turnover, or service their level of debt. You'd probably factor in a modest level of growth each year on an ordinary basis. However, obviously due to the pandemic, there's been a dual economy that's running in the marketplace in Ireland right now. There's the haves and the have-nots. So in order to give your business the best chance of survival, a robust planning and corporate governance best practice is essential to preserving your business health. So in order to assist our clients that we've been working with, on the left-hand side here, we've kind of put together a summary of all the conversations and recommendations we've been having to a large number of our distressed clients in the last 12 months in a variety of different COVID-affected areas. So they've actually been coming to us directly. It's a lot of putting fires out. So they've been coming to us directly, seeking advice, what to do, and we are giving them a helping hand to put the fires out. So some directors had been concerned with us around trading while insolvent and needed a refresher on their director duties. And corporate governance best practice. So which I'm sure most people on this call will be familiar with, as accountants are usually the go-to advisor, the trusted advisor that directors lean on in times of distress. So a year into your pandemic now, most of your clients on the left-hand slide here will have implemented the majority of these suggestions, like transparent dialogue with creditors. You'd hoard cash because, as we all know, running out of cash means running out of road. Aggressive cost-cutting measures, managing cash flows may not have been performed. All the steps on the right here, which are essential and which we would like to see in a robust corporate governance structure. So cost-based realignment, I guess aggressive cost cutting is essential, and something that most businesses who have been adversely affected by COVID have already done in the last 12 months. So one thing that we're obviously keen to reaffirm with our clients every time we meet them is, look, don't let a good recession go to waste, or a pandemic, and let your clients slip back into bad habits when the pandemic is over. So you can never do enough scenario testing either here. So what we're helping businesses with their future cash flows, what it's going to look like. Is it going to be 50, 70, 90% of turnover? Where's your break-even point? And then you can assess, can you reasonably pay off all of the old debt you've incurred due to COVID, as well as the new debt? So in relation to corporate governance on the right, we would recommend here that the documenting decisions made, even if they're perceived trivial ones, are really important. Lodging all your returns, minuting regular meetings with directors and management meetings, talking about the buildup of tax debt, even if it's just building up tax debt, we're building it up and here's our plan to pay it. I can pass over to Neil now on the next slide, and he can talk about the dizzy array of funders which have drastically changed. So I've been away in Australia working in restructuring for the last 10 years and came back to Ireland late last year. And it's just a completely different landscape to the one that I left and that I came back to recently.
Yeah, it's totally changed, Owen, and changed for the better. And I suppose if we look, first of all, here in terms of, the amount of capital, and look, this is a very busy slide, okay? We totally understand that. But just to break it down maybe into some of the constituent parts here, if, for example, a client was to come into you and saying, listen, I need to refinance, I'm going to have to do something here. Actually, Owen, you might come in during this chat here in terms of the SBCI and some of the state-backed funding, which I think is a key takeaway for today for anybody who's on the call in terms of the ideas in terms of refinancing. But sorry, just to talk about the traditional, or what would you call, I suppose, pillar banks over on the left-hand side. Now, Ulster Bank is still on the list there. We don't have KBC on this list. This slide actually has been, we have shamelessly robbed it from Intertrade Ireland. This is their summary of funders in Ireland. That's the North-South cooperation body for promoting business, which bizarrely has the identical logo to Baker Tilly. It's absolutely identical. But in any event, the point is the pillar banks on the left-hand side, we are really left now with 2.5 pillars. I'm starting to question the name pillar when describing banks, actually, because if you've got 2.5, it kind of sounds like a 2.5-legged stool, if that's what we're going to describe pillar banks as. We've Bank of Ireland, AIB, Permanent TSB is coming on. They've now got a joint venture, I think, on with Bibby, who are over on the far right, I think, somewhere, whereby they are looking to try and drive on in terms of commercial lending, which is really welcome, because it's just going to be so important now with the recent news about KBC and their possible exit. HSBC, Barclays, Rabo tend not to be that accessible for a lot of SME clients. So you really are, from the point of view of traditional banking, you really are looking at a very limited sort of pool of places to go, which is why it is so important that as practitioners, we become more familiar with what's out there in terms of the alternatives. My own view, I must say, in terms of the banking scenario, I mean, I think that the government are going to, at a really high level, have to start asking the question, why is it that there are so few banks willing to do business in Ireland? As it happens, we have a restructuring team that we run in Nicosia in Cyprus. And if you look at the banking sector in a small island like Cyprus, where they have, for example, Bank of Cyprus, Hellenic Bank, Alpha Bank, Astro Bank, CDB, and I've only just named a handful. Like it goes on, the number of banks that are trading in the marketplace. And that is, I suppose, a sign of a good, healthy, competitive economy where our clients have options. And that's not happening in terms of traditional banking. So that's why I think looking at the alternative, to switch over to the right-hand side, this is becoming more and more important with the likes of Capital Flow, for example, the likes of Bibby and Close and organizations like this. So there is I suppose, a much more mature market in the UK in terms of what would be called the challenger banks. But I think there has to be so much more done to try and bring on these organizations so that they can play a much stronger role in how capital is deployed around the economy in a scenario whereby we are left with so little competition. And by the way, just to give you an example of how this manifests itself, you will have some clients who may have burned bridges in the last recession with one of the, say, pillar banks, because of the fact that they would have fallen into arrears and they would perhaps have a record with one of the banks. And if that's the case, and even though they may be back on their feet for a number of years now, they really have no other option. They may have, between AIB and Bank of Ireland, for example, they may feel that they have no other option in terms of a bank in Ireland. And that should be unacceptable to us all as business people. So we need to be aware of these organizations, the types of products and services they provide, asset-based lending, invoice discounting, the working capital finance, supply line. You will find that a lot of these organizations on the right are really flexible compared to the approach that the banks will take. And we have a number of interactions with them in some of the restructuring projects that we would have done to try and help businesses turn a corner and come out the far end. So strongly recommend that you be familiar with this slide. This is something I'm sure, Liz, we could make available to any delegates here because there's probably a little much to take on. And then we've got the two panels in the middle. Then you're looking at some of the non-traditional lenders, say, and some of the private equity partners. Now, by the way, these are just a sample. There's another 50 organizations that you could put in here of businesses which are really keen to deploy capital to suitable businesses. This doesn't include, for example, EWIS money. Like Baker Tilly has a joint venture with Goodbody, the Goodbody EWIS fund, and that's another source of finance potentially for businesses. Each one has their own sort of appetite. They've got their own deal size, but kind of getting to know some of these is going to be a critical issue. Owen, do you want to come in on the refinancing options that are available for SBCI funding, for example?
Yeah, sure. I'll touch on that on the next slide. I think that one of the key things here is to reaffirm in our hope parameters is that, obviously this is a completely different scenario. Everyone will be aware of the last recession. Myself and Neil worked in insolvency in the last recession in 2008. And there was no capital flow going through any of the marketplace. The banks had contracted. They couldn't lend to anyone, even if you had an excellent business plan. Yeah. personal perspective, you had a deposit saved, you're ready to buy a house, and the bank said no, you're not getting the lending that you would need to acquire a house in this stage. So this is a completely different market space that we're in. You've got negative interest rates that can be lent to governments who are then passing that on to the banks. So there's loads of capital and there's loads of money that's flowing through our economy, and we have a host of suite of clients who are talking to us regularly, looking to acquire businesses, and they will say, look, our criteria was XYZ, we want an experienced management team, etc. But now their criteria is slipped. They said, look, we're looking to do deals, we're looking to get into the marketplace, and we're looking to invest because we've got this cash burning a hole in our pocket. So it is a completely different stage to when we were 13 years ago in the last crash. So it's worth noting that. Obviously,
yes. And by the way, that is the same similar point to what you're making in terms of the deposit savings that are out there, because likewise businesses have a lot of cash on hand as well. I was at a seminar a couple of weeks ago with the chief economist in Goodbody. He was speaking about an unleashing of the savings within individuals that individuals have and businesses have post-pandemic, which would be the sort of economic effect that was last seen after the Second World War, when there was that boom, when all of a sudden economies woke up again. So really, I suppose everything we're talking about today is about making sure that as many businesses as possible stay in the game, so that they can take advantage of that recovery phase, that they have, positioned themselves so that they are, they're able to actually take advantage of those opportunities, that they're aware of what's out there.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a credit as well. Obviously, all of the clients we're dealing with, it's a credit as well to those financial institutions who have been so supportive of businesses who have been shuttered for the last 12 months.
Yeah.
They're giving abatements and stuff like that. So, everyone's sort of come to the party on this. The government's helping, the institutional lenders are helping. Oddly enough, it's actually when we deal with a lot of restaurants, associations, and stuff like that, and we're helping out with clients in that space in hospitality, and they say actually all of the bigger players have been great. It's actually the smaller players that are contracting their cash flow, asking to get paid, further down the line. So that's the kind of dichotomy that we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, they're under more pressure on. I think that's what it is. Some of the smaller players. Do you want to take this next piece on? Sure. In terms of?
Yeah. So again, so this is as Neil was alluding to, this is our slide to say, look, this is all of the supports available to people, to businesses affected by COVID or not. So again, most people will all be aware of the main government supports available here. So like you have your EWSS, you have your PUP, your CRSS. This slide is kind of just a checklist of all of the different supports available, ranging from the income supports on the left-hand side here to in the middle, you have grants, vouchers, schemes in the middle, which is primarily focused on kind of growth and regeneration. And then finally, you have all of your tax stuff. You've got the rates waivers and tax measures on the right-hand side. So I won't go into every support on the page, given the sheer quantum, and each grant is specific. Each grant has have different criterias. I'll just touch on a few of the key ones that we've been seeing with our clients. Obviously, to be cognizant that the tax component associated with all your EWSS payment and any applicable public holiday and annual leave accrued during associated with the EWSS is worth taking advice on if you were availing of it, seeking legal and tax if your advisors were unsure. If you were unsure. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the CRSS. So this is obviously available. This is the COVID restriction support scheme available to businesses with restricted access to customers to a premises. So you can claim to revenue for an advanced credit trading expense. It can be up to 10% of your average weekly wage in 2019 to a max cap of 5K per week. So some of the clients we've been dealing with in the hospitality space as well, primarily, we've been informed that actually certain landlords are initiating legal proceedings to try and agitate a situation where they get the majority of that payment. So, the first 3 or 4 months, it was an absolute foregone conclusion that you would get a rent abatement and you get a moratorium on your rental payments while your business was closed. But slowly but surely, because of landlords being such a broad church, you've got your large institutional lenders, and you've got your small mum and dad owners, and they all want to get paid. So we've seen that landlords have been quite agitating in that space. So this provision made more headlines actually in the business community that were excluded from availing from it. So if you had, for example, if you had an event catering company, even though they were in the same boat as a restaurant and a wedding venue, like they had rent, they had rates, and they had employees, they couldn't avail of this scheme in the lockdown. The new one that's come out recently that some people might not be aware, it's only in the last month. So it's an outdoor seating and accessories for tourism scheme. So it focuses on the outdoor seating industry. It's set to provide a level of support to tourism and hospitality businesses in town centres. So to purchase or upgrade equipment or to provide additional seating and therefore increase their outdoor dining capacity hopefully in the summer of 2021. So it closes on the end of September this year. And you can apply for a grant. It's a grant of up to £4,000 for up to 75% of the cost of the equipment. And it's retrospective as well. So if you've purchased equipment from the 1st of April 2020 to when the scheme ends on 30 September. So this scheme, you can avail of it. You just have to show invoices and photographs, etc. And it will financially assist and support independent tourism and hospitality businesses in that industry. This is the last one I want to touch on now. This is Neil's point around the credit guarantee scheme, which is SBCI funded. So it's been extended to 31st of December 2021 this year, and obviously it's a scheme that's 80% government guaranteed to participating lenders with some of the lowest interest rates in the market right now. So I think everyone would agree, and I think the government have come to the table on this, and they said the volume on the take-up of this initiative is not what they had hoped it would be. I think they've only lent out about 350 million of a €2 billion fund. So just over 5,000 SMEs have availed of it. You can get loans of up to 10 grand to 1 million over repayment terms of up to 5.5 years. So loans of up to 250k are unsecured, and no PGs are, you don't have to give any personal guarantees, which is what myself and Neil remember from the last recession, is what crippled Irish entrepreneurs. But given like the 80% government guarantee, lenders are very keen to do this, to lend out this money. However, obviously standard lending criteria still applies, irrespective of this government guarantee. So you have to have your robust business plan to be able to avail of it.
Did you say why the reason was there was such a low uptake on it?
I think the reason is that it's because it's around the standard lending criteria still apply. So prior to the pandemic, this legislation is still in place that says you need a robust business plan to be able to avail of it, and it's hard for businesses who have the doors closed to be able to say, "I'll be able to pay this back in the future." So it's a myriad of reasons.
Just on that, by the way, Kevin has just chimed in here with a comment exactly the same. I think make the exact same point that some tourism-related businesses they won't kind of apply for that. But then there are a cohort of businesses which do have personally guaranteed loans, where they will apply for it. And there's an opportunity now to remove personal guarantees from some of our client base, which because of, I think a lot of it as well is people are just not aware of it.
Yeah.
Inertia.
Correct. So if effectively you can refinance debt incurred as a result of COVID, it's just you can't write off any pre-pandemic debt. So like obviously if you're eating into an expensive overdraft facility or you borrowed from another short-term lender due to COVID, you can borrow from these schemes, and you can talk to, there's a myriad of lenders out there I think they've extended it now to credit unions you can borrow from. So obviously some of the directors we've been working with in this space, just for a peace of mind, have actually applied for it, had it approved. They just haven't drawn down on it, and it's their little safety net in case their cash position dwindles.
And that is a point actually that David has actually also made here in terms of suggesting that post offices and credit unions can fill that gap in terms of Ulster Bank. And I think you're quite right, David. I mean, it's again the more options that are out there. And I think obviously the government share your view because they're now pushing some of this SBCI money through the credit unions. So likewise, it's broadening out the base.
Yeah. And is there a time when you should restructure? Do you know, where's the fine line between? Yeah,
that's another question that David has also raised here in terms of, he has suggested that some clients are waiting until all the supports and subsidies are withdrawn before they actually start making the decision. And that's exactly right. I couldn't agree more, David. That's exactly what's happening. And we are only going to actually find, all these businesses currently in hospitality and so on are being paid by the government to sit down. It's only when they have to stand back up that we'll find out that some of them in fact are going to fall over. And that is where it is too late. So David, I totally agree with you, is that if the thing is left too long, and if people don't deal with the issues that they have now, well, they have the chance, they have protection because of the subsidies, then it could well be too late, because they'll find themselves in a formal insolvency process at that time. Because I think we're going to look now at some of those options as to what those, the different options are. I think you're going to fly through some of those. But so yeah, no, it's a common denominator, and it's human nature. I think, people don't want to face up to the harsh realities of where they are. And so they kick the can down the road to the point where, their options have narrowed and their control has slipped away. And that's
so the takeaway from today is that they should be looking at how it is now at the moment and going forward. That's
the entire theme, really, Liz, of today, was to try and health check businesses so that more and more of our clients survive the recovery phase. So even it'd be just a dreadful shame if they survive the recession, but then they don't survive the recovery. That would just be a real shame, and very damaging, by the way, to our practices, to the firms of whom are on this call. So, the more and more clients that we can right size, get them right so that they can pay a decent fee every year, they're thriving again. That's what the ultimate outcome is, I suppose, that we wanted from today's session. Owen, over to you again. Sorry, in terms of some of the options.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Neil. So look, we just prepared this slide at a high level to say, look, there are loads of options available to businesses, ranging from your informal advisory in the top left-hand corner. So that just would typically involve engaging an industry expert or maybe a consultant who could, or probably even your accountant, who could help you strip out unnecessary costs. I know we're doing that in our industry right now. They can help you right size a profit and loss. You can assist the company to engage with their stakeholders, etc. Like if you have a landlord dispute, which is again something we're working on. So it's currently not available. It's not the most suitable things for business that are severely affected by COVID-19, where they've just built up so much a level of debt over the last year. Then again, you've got voluntary workout, or another name for it is kind of consensual restructuring, is attractive because it's confidential and control would remain with the director. So it's not splashed all over the newspapers. So the parties would typically agree a standstill agreement, which whilst a longer, restructuring plan can be negotiated with larger stakeholders. A range of solutions can be arrived at, and you have kind of payment plans with the key mechanisms of over 12 months or 3 months, or you get new debt or equity. It can be difficult to coordinate, as you need to continue to trade the business and obtain unanimous agreement for a write-down with all of your creditors. And then we move on to schemes of arrangement at the top right there. You'd reach an arrangement with your creditors. You would need the majority in number of each creditor class and 75% in value of each class to ratify the scheme. You don't have to do any reporting to the ODCE, and there's no loss of control. It doesn't automatically afford the protection of the courts, because obviously that's what a lot of the situations myself and Neil will get involved with. There is a wolf at the door. There's someone who's agitating for payment, and the pressure valve has sort of been released in the marketplace in the last 12 months, like your ordinary debtor creditor business model, where you supply goods and you get paid for those goods. That pressure valve has just been released. So for restructuring of this nature to occur, usually larger corporates would avail of this with time on their side to bring creditors to the table. Refinancing is something that Neil's touched on, and you're talking about all the myriad of different funders and lenders that are in this space. If you didn't like your current lender, or you were concerned about their language or rhetoric, because there obviously are some bad stories out there, just know that there are options available, and funders are happy to be kind of gaining additional market share at reasonable rates. Examinership I'll only touch on because I know Neil's going to be talking about that on the next slide. But in respect to the SMEs that we deal with, they're actively talking to us about restructuring options, and examinership seems to be the main one that they're talking to us about. So they've kind of already formed their plans. They cannot see a way out of the kind of mountain of debt and the losses they've incurred in the last 12 months. However, most are waiting until these, like we discussed, these government supports have been withdrawn and they have to stand on their own 2 feet again before going through a formal process. So seen as one of the best formal restructuring tools in the EU. And that's why when Cyprus recently needed a restructuring scheme a number of years ago, they chose Ireland's rather than any other country in the EU. It's the main aim is to preserve jobs, employment, and that would otherwise been lost in a liquidation. It's a court supervised rescue package where a scheme is implemented by the examiner and then voted on by the creditors and approved by court. I'll I will only mention briefly this summary rescue process on the right-hand side. We're going to have another slide on that. But I can pass over to Neil, because I suppose he's on the coal face of a lot of these restructurings that they've done, and give you some kind of real life examples of what a scheme would look like, and give you a sense of what required to get a scheme over the line. And some of the numbers might surprise you, and you can dispel some of the myths associated with restructuring in Ireland.
Yeah, I suppose we've got experience of a couple of hundred at least of schemes of arrangement that we would have put in place to ensure a business would survive. And just to look at some of these are kind of real life examples here, and to talk about the top left, Fallon Burn business in 2012, large business, and you can see here they became insolvent because of an overrun on the construction of the premises and the fit out of the premises. Over €1 million owing to the revenue, but the revenue accepted 32% here in full and final settlement, and the unsecured creditors 16%. Then you had a private members club in the top right in Dublin City, and again you can see here kind of a standard type of a scheme of arrangement here, with 20% to revenue and other preferential creditors accepted, and 10% to unsecured creditors. You see a lot of 5% dividends now being accepted in some of these schemes. For example, we had a construction company a couple of weeks ago, just finished in the circuit court in Bray, and it came out the far end successfully and is out solvent again. And the dividend will be only 3% to unsecured creditors, and the vast majority of people accepted it. So there is a lot of acceptance out there in terms of dividends. Just mentioned a pub down on the bottom left here, it's on the main street in Gorey, Katie Daly's. So this is a typical SME business which became insolvent, but with a new investment. Revenue accepted half of the amount owing to them, and the unsecured creditors 5%. And then finally the Regency on the bottom right hand corner. So this became insolvent after that dreadful shooting, which people will be familiar with, in the Regency Hotel. And most unusual scheme here, because you can see, because of the value of the property that's there, which is now called the Bonington, as people will be familiar with, and you can see that it's, I suppose, most unusually, all creditors were paid in full. So there has been a few examples where the assets would allow a refinancing, which is what happened here. We arranged a refinancing with one of the central two panels we were looking at on the refinancing slide, some of those private equity. We arranged a refinancing here to secure the future of the Regency, which has gone on now to rebrand, and hopefully post-pandemic can go on to trade again. So the purpose of this slide was, this is the if all else fails slide. This is for business owners to know that even if they find themselves grossly insolvent, if the fundamental business is viable, if actually what they're doing is viable, then there are options out there to put a scheme in place to try and come out the far end anyway, even where most of the creditors are not paid in full. So that was the background to this, and hopefully that people will see that there are options there from this.
Neil, do you find, I suppose, it's kind of endemic in the Irish psyche around, if you hear of someone who's gone through a restructuring process in the past, they would be of view potentially, or they mismanaged their business, when obviously that can be, in your experience, that can be far from the case.
There's a pride factor on. You're quite right. It's maybe not a completely Irish thing. We see the same thing in Southeast Europe, and even more so maybe in terms of the loss of face, which would be in some of the, Greece and Cyprus and so on. But it is an Irish phenomenon. It's an Irish male phenomenon, I have to say. Whereas I suppose the opposite to perhaps the US, where, restructuring your business is seen as a badge of honor. If you do it twice, it's even seen as a greater badge of honor. Somebody's gone bust twice and come back. It's not really the same here. The difference this pandemic, though, is that there's so many businesses closed. I would hope that there will be a more enlightened approach to business recovery in this time, because
no one would begrudge someone a restructure now if they had their business closed and they incurred debts for 15 months.
Central Bank predicted that maybe 25% of businesses are currently vulnerable to not being able to reopen. So we are going to have to change the conversation actually about, recovery, because there are so many jobs on the line. There's 25 billion, I think, this year is going to be spent again, the same again last year. That has to be paid back at some stage. The only way that can be paid back is to get everybody back to work, so that everybody is contributing and paying tax, with a view to then ultimately paying off in the long term. And it won't be just us, it won't be everybody on this call, it'll be the next generation after us that'll be paying it back. But the key to it is to be able to get businesses to survive and get everybody back to work. That was one of the reasons, that's one of the key issues in terms of the book, as to why we decided to write the book. And I have a feeling, Liz, this might have been the reason why we were prompted to come on as guests here, I'm guessing. But in any event, no, this is just in the last couple of weeks the book was launched. We're actually going to have a full launch, I think it's the 18th of May, I think. I think so. This is a little sneak preview for the Northwest Society, but I think the entire membership is going to be invited to a proper launch of the book on the 18th of May. So we would, I suppose, we have a lot of experience of the success, and we've seen firsthand the success of the examinership process. And I suppose just to give you a kind of a personal insight on it, it's most unusual for an accountant, a chartered accountant in practice, to get to meet with, say, the employees of a company, to have it called together a town hall type staff meeting and announce at the end of a restructuring process like an examinership that the business is going to be solvent, that your job is safe, that you can go home to your partner, your wife or your husband or whatever, to explain that yes, we are going to be able to pay the mortgage at the end of this month. To see the relief on people's faces, the round of applause, everything, it's so rewarding. The work that we do, myself and Owen, in terms of business rescue is just, I have found it to be incredibly rewarding. Because look, frankly, we've seen the other side of it as well. We've seen the town halls where it's a liquidation, where it's a scenario, and we've seen the horror stories of the last few years, the Cleary's of this world, the Debenham story just rumbles on and on. So trying to avoid those stories is, I suppose, what inspires us. We keep an index of the jobs saved every year. And I suppose you'd be, perhaps surprised to read that there's been over 15,000 jobs saved in the last 10 years from successful SME examinership cases. But yet it is still massively underused compared to other restructuring mechanisms. And that was, I suppose, the main reason why we wanted to try and put our experience and expertise into one volume, especially for practitioners. There's other legal books out there. There's the big company law based legal books on examinership, which are really of no use whatsoever to practitioners. Like, our idea was to try and just spread the message wider as to how, in practical terms, the practical steps you can do. When you show up at the door and you meet the directors, like, what do you say? What's next? What is the actual steps you take? How do you deal with creditors? How do you make sure suppliers keep supplying a business that's struggling? And those are the sort of practical things that we wanted to put into this book, so that we would remove some of that mystique that still surrounds the concept that it's just for big companies. When, we've seen businesses like SME businesses like Katie Davies in Gorey successfully coming through and still employing 40 or 50 people in Gorey, and hopefully again post-pandemic. So that was the background to the book. Maybe we won't have to go into too much detail really on the book, but that was the background to why we decided to put that together, and with huge assistance from Chartered Accountants Ireland, which we're very appreciative of. So that was great. I just have one more question actually, before we turn to the summary rescue process from David, who's asking, what effect will the pandemic have on Ireland's borrowing figures when all the issues are resolved? Will state borrowing be 100% more or 150%, presumably of GDP? And what's the likely percentage increase? My understanding is it is going to be up to 110 or 120%. That's a worrying figure. And I think there is a view in government generally. There's a grand bet being taken that we will grow our way out of this problem. There's not too much talk about paying it back. There's more talk about the fact that if the economy can come roaring back, that we have the roaring 20s, that in fact our debt to GDP will come into manageable levels. I'm a little worried about that myself in terms of that strategy. But one way or the other, I think the answer, David, to your question is that yes, we are going to have debt to GDP, which is going to be in the upper sort of half of EU states generally. And I think it's going to be a long time before it gets back down to the more manageable kind of 60 to 70%, which is probably where we would have been heading into that territory just before the pandemic kicked off. Owen, over to you on summary rescue process then.
Sure. Thanks, Neil. So this is a newly proposed piece of legislation, actually, a new corporate rescue mechanism that's been recommended recently by the CLRG, the Company Law Reform Group, in an October 2020 report as a potential restructuring framework that's focusing on micro and small companies who in their estimation make up 98% of all Ireland's corporates and employ in the region of 788,000 people. So the primary objective of this proposed legislation, similar to examinership, is to save enterprise and any jobs provided by it. The current COVID-19 crisis, as we know, has exacerbated the need for restructuring options for small and micro businesses with less red tape and lower costs. So this will streamline the process for all stakeholders. It can be enacted by a director by simple ordinary resolution. So you don't need to go to court to ask for protection from your creditors or to get the court to ratify your scheme like you do from examinership. So the process underwent public consultation processes that was concluded on the 5th of March with the goal of finalising the legislation before this summer recess. Although the legislation is still yet to be constructed, the draft elements constructed by the CLRG are included below. So it's kind of an emphasis on businesses that satisfy two or more of the following 3 requirements. If you had annual turnover up to 12, balance sheet of up to 6 or up to 50 employees. So this is the majority of businesses in Ireland. You would commence the process by resolution of directors rather than a court like examinership. Directors should commence the process following advice from a qualified insolvency practitioner into the viability of the company, then subject to a compromise with their creditors. You can get assistance from an insolvency practitioner to oversee the process, and that is required. And then they would prepare a rescue plan, similar enough to what Neil has done on countless times for his examinership cases. You need a majority of 50% plus 1 in value of the total creditor pool in order to support the rescue plan, rather than the, say, for example, the 75% that you need in a scheme of arrangement in Part 9 of the Companies Act. So it's shorter time period. This is the things that clients usually speak to us is how much will it cost and how long will it take? They're the main questions, and it's much shorter period than examinership. They're looking at between 42 and 50 days has been mentioned, but we'll just have to see what the final legislation looks like. A cross cram down of debts is available as part of the restructure. Likely the rescue plan approved will not require any application to court, provided no creditors object. So look, the key right now is timing. So there's no coincidence here. This isn't like, this is, the government want this legislation passed as quickly as possible before they actually unwind their government COVID supports are withdrawn, so that you can enable SMEs to access better value and quicker restructuring tool. It's probably the most significant change that's happened in our industry, in the restructuring industry in Ireland since 1990, when they implemented the examinership scheme. The government have all the requisite information at their disposal to make this happen. I know that Robert Troy, Minister for State and Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, really has the bit between the teeth to try and get this legislation enacted before the summer recess. So we can all watch this space with interest. It's obviously not a process that people enter into lightly and are keyed to avoid at all costs. But look, we think it's good to know that help is on the way for businesses that don't see any way forward. So I suppose that's the end of our presentation, Neil.
Yeah, and I think the benefit in terms of that is if you remove the court aspect to it, people fear the courts generally. Nobody wants to go in front of a judge. Nobody wants to sort of have that association of, first of all, the public side of it, because you're going in at a court with court reporters, but also the fact that the judges are associated with judgments, with sentences, with jail. You know, there is that kind of connotation, even if it's incorrect in people's heads. So it's nice to think that we can try and resolve it, like by way of a voluntary examinership. So just in terms of just again a final couple of questions maybe before we hand over to you, Siobhan.
Sure.
The number of examinerships that came through in 2020 was low. Not just the number of successful examinerships, but the number of examinerships full stop. So do you think formal restructuring tools like examinership and the summary rescue process will be the vehicles of choice for companies who built up too much debt? I would say that they will for those that absolutely need it. I mean, the first choice for all businesses is to try and avoid a formal insolvency. So if they can sort it out themselves informally with some of those options we talked about earlier, that's the first step they will take. But then inevitably, we should actually just be aware of the fact that Ireland is seen as one of the best places in the world to restructure. Like Norwegian Airlines, for example, perfect example of that. They could have chosen to position themselves anywhere. It's highly likely, I think, that we're going to see more and more, even international companies that have operations in lots of different jurisdictions. And they need to choose a country to be the lead country for their restructuring. They're going to choose Ireland because of the robust.
And also because of Brexit, Neil, as well.
Yeah, likewise, exactly. And there's going to be that push as well on it. So we think it certainly is, and especially the summary rescue process for micro businesses and SMEs that qualify, that they will, if they can, there's no objections. Like, for example, we were in, just very quickly, 10 seconds, Moscow Plastics examinership, circuit court in Bray. There was nobody objecting. The revenue were present, but there was no person objected to court, but we still had barristers, solicitors, the judge. And I was thinking to myself, this is the ideal case for a summary rescue process, because we don't need the court system for this. We should be able to lodge our scheme with the CRO and it becomes binding. In the same way as a liquidation meeting, if there's a liquidator appointed, you lodge it in the CRO and the liquidator is the liquidator, and that's it. So I think we need to trust the chartered accountants. I think the economy needs to trust chartered accountants more in terms of our ability to rescue and restructure these viable enterprises so that they can go on to contribute to our recovery phase. So we're going to finish up there, I think, Liz. We promised we'd finish early, and we have just finished a few minutes early. Give Siobhan a few more minutes.
Lads, thanks very much. I do appreciate you. Thank you very much. It's been great. It's been very informative, and you can tell that by the number of questions coming in. So thank you again.
No problem.
And now, Siobhan, if you want to take it away there, you're more than welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Siobhan McSharry, as Liz has said, and a big thank you to Liz for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I'm hoping Kathy will be able to share my slides, if that's okay. Kathy, can you do that for me? Fantastic. Okay, great. So I've been asked on behalf of the Northwest Society to speak to the insurance health check. And I suppose as I began to think about this afternoon's presentation, it struck me very strongly that a lot of the information that you deal with for your clients in terms of their financial position, their financial information, is very much the same information that we use. And so very much that it fits together. And so in doing this presentation, I'm also going to maybe highlight some of the Brexit and lockdown considerations in the insurances. But I'm also hoping you'll sort of rethink, or it'll reinforce your view of insurance as very much protecting the client. It's protecting their tangible assets, their stock, their net asset position, their retained earnings position. So very much looking at insurance as sitting behind the client's financials and their financial position. Obviously, we're going to chat quickly about lockdown. Very much in the insurance world, we've been working with clients through their lockdown. It's very much been an ongoing process, and as we come out, that will change again. But the real message from me and to pass to your clients is the need to notify. They need to be notifying us as an ongoing and notifying us when they come out of lockdown. A little bit about business interruption. It's got a lot of bad press, but I'm still advocating it as extremely valuable cover. And a little bit about the Consumer Insurance Act coming. It's already partly enforced, known as Ceca, and very much tipping the balance, but with more questions to be asked of clients. So just to reiterate, again, the crossover between what the work you do and the work we do for clients. You'll identify your client in the insurance speak. They are the insured. They'll be unincorporated or an LTD or a branch in the context of their insurance, particularly at the moment for an unincorporated an LTD. In the context of Brexit, if they are a UK or an NI client, now in the post-Brexit world, they'll need to use a UK regulated provider. So, for example, if, in the past we may have had businesses owned or property owned by people resident in NI or UK, that will now change. They'll have to use UK regulated providers. In the context of branch, we're always very much conscious of what's needed at a local level versus what's needed at the foreign entity level. In the financial statements, you'll speak to the business address. In the insurance context, that's the risk address. And again, an interesting add-on here in the lockdown scenarios, for a lot of clients, they may now have another risk address, particularly they may be operating from home, even storing product from home. So the need to add that as a risk address. Again, you'll highlight the principal activity of the client in the financial statements. We very much push out the whole description of what a client does in many ways to protect them. The better describe the activity, the more protection it gives the client. So we'll look at all the activities and process, describing those, whether the client is new or established, the sector they operate, because from an insurer's point of view, the sector may be high or low risk, their typical client base, and importantly, if they're service-based or a product producer. And we'll come back to this, but obviously in the whole lockdown scenario, some or all of that will have changed, and the need to notify. Again, going back to the financial statements, you as auditors will be looking to, the businesses, whether it's going to continue, it's going concern the next 12 months, the directors in terms of principal risks and uncertainty. We're looking at changes to risks on an ongoing basis. So during the life of the policy, any material changes need to be notified, and come renewal, again, we're looking forward for the next 12 months. And obviously in the whole lockdown scenario that we're all working our way through, change has been ongoing. It can be material change, and extremely important that there's that ongoing notification going on. Just again, in the context of Brexit, it's just again to be aware of this. And I'm using the term provider in the loose sense, because what I'm highlighting here is the provider is a chain of people. It'll be your broker, insurer agents like MGAs or wholesale brokers, and the insurer. But the key takeaway, just that to be conscious in the post-Brexit world, all entities in the chain must now be either EU regulated or regulated directly here in Ireland. So as most of you will be aware, and clients will see this now coming through in their documentation, most UK insurers are now either based here and regulated directly by the central bank. So again, we're looking at the same information, but to some extent we're looking at it differently, and that's what I'm trying to highlight here. In the financial statements, you'll be looking at the various assets. They're based on their depreciated book value at a point in time, being the year end. We need to look at that differently. We're looking at assets in terms of their replacement value and at the time of loss. You'll look at going back to the financials, you'll be looking at the actual financials, what has happened in the past reporting period. We're very much concerned with the projected financials for the next policy period. So in summary, to some extent, the financial statements have looked back. They're a particular point in time. With us, we're looking forward, and we're trying to project values and project the figures. So if I look at the typical things in a client's financial statements in terms of their assets, property will be a big one. From an insurance point of view, it's not the actual value of the property, because clearly in a doomsday scenario, if the property burns to the ground, it's actually just the building that is having to be replaced. So in fact, from an insurance point of view, it's the reinstatement value of the building. And you may be replacing what was an old building now with a new building, and therefore there'll be an uplift needed for things like the building regulations. As I've said, you will be excluding the site value, you will be including the fixtures and fittings because they're an integral part of the structure, and you'll have all the other costs that need to be included, like debris removal, professional fees, and so on. So again, there's a difference. It's the same thing we're looking at, but we're looking at it slightly differently. Similarly with plant and machinery, there'll be a book value for the existing plant, but we'll actually be looking at the potential replacement value of that plant and machinery, which in most scenarios you could be replacing old plant and machinery with up-to-date modern machinery, which will be much more expensive. Yeah.
Given that there's an awful lot of premises closed at the moment, or shops and all of that kind of thing, What should the people be doing to, I suppose, or the tenants to protect their premises, or, you know, to keep, I know they have to notify you, but what else should they be doing?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to jump into that. What most insurers will have done in terms of premises that are closed, Liz, they're essentially being treated as being unoccupied. So those insurers will have notified us, my business, my premises are closed. Their insurer will then have said, we want you to do certain things. You'll need to turn off the water. You'll need to make sure the electricity, all electrical appliances are off, etc., etc. So there'll have all been all of these conditions to meet, Liz, which are essentially conditions as though the unoccupancy conditions. The one that was a movable feast, Liz, was that of inspection. In a normal course, there would have been the need to inspect, but in lockdown, that has fallen away.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
So just as I say, we're continuously looking at the same information. For example, with stock, work in progress, we're looking at that as a sort of you're looking at it as a static, we're looking at it as an average level that has to be adjusted. For example, when there's finished product or for seasonal changes. And then the other key financials like gross profit, obviously we're looking at the projected gross profit, or you're basically looking to protect the client's top line, whether that's their gross profit line or their income line for business interruption. You are looking at their actual turnover, the turnover that's just passed. We're looking at the projected turnover for the next 12 months. And we're using it to rate the necessary public liability cover, generally at 10 million, products, if they produce products at 10 million. And similarly, in terms of wage roll, you'll look at it from an actual point of view. We'll be looking at the projected wage roll and projected number of staff to rate the employment liability cover generally at 13 million. So as I say, much of what I've touched on there is, we've touched on the various assets that need the property damage cover, and underlying that is that the insurance is basically protecting the tangible assets and the net asset position. The business interruption cover, basically protecting the client's top line, whether it's based on gross profit or their income, and also any knock-on costs and increased costs needed to keep that business going. And obviously the cost of that insurance will increase depending on the length of the indemnity period. Most clients would have 12 months, but because of the cost element, but certainly in reality, most businesses can take longer than 12 months to actually get going again. And then similarly, as I say, the client will have public and employers liability, and that's essentially protecting their cash and the retained earnings position. The most customers, the potential claim is coming in by their customer. It's a third-party claim, could be based on personal injury or property loss, or from their products. There's also the potential of claims by staff, and in the insurance legal world, the definition of staff is wider. It's your employees for certain. It's also anyone that volunteers with you, depending on the nature of your business, and it's also your contractors under your direction and control. And I haven't added this to the slide, but it's not a given that your policy will pay out. And I suppose when I think about the most cases where there is an issue on liability, it's generally around non-disclosure. Non-disclosure would be one of the main reasons insurers seek to not pay out, or gross negligence by the clients. And I suppose my only thought is that certainly in the current world and the current lockdown scenario, where a lot of clients are struggling just to keep their head above water, that's the very time when the eye can come off the ball in terms of keeping up with other maintenance or other requirements that mean that the policy will and should pay out. I'm just on the right hand side of the slide. I'm just mentioning other types of cover. Most of you will be familiar, but they're obviously there. And similarly, the cover for bad debt, credit insurance is available. It's very much a specialized kind of insurance. We don't actually provide it, but it is available in the marketplace. Then just to focus a little on lockdown, and as I say, it's very much something we've been looking at with clients, because it has and continues to be very important that they're notifying what is happening to them now and has been happening. So if I take the three, broad speaking, the three scenarios from an insurance point of view, number one is what I call the lucky clients. Essentially, their activity is unchanged. Their staff are working behind closed doors or remote working. And I suppose I'm thinking there of the likes of accountants and solicitors and brokers like ourselves. We are the lucky ones, and limited footfall to our front door. So you're still looking at full property cover, full employer's liability, noting the remote working, with potentially some reduction for the more limited public liability exposure. The second category then is what I call the ones that have adapted, clients that have gone online. They're doing click and collect, whatever it is they may have done. In most scenarios, they have reduced number of staff, therefore reduced wage roll, and they've reduced footfall and turnover. So again, they still need their full property cover. They'll have needed to notify to what extent their business activity has changed, and there's potentially some premium rebate for their reduced EL and PL exposure. And again, that's something we would, generally speaking, insurers haven't really dealt with it during the life of the policy, although some have, but it's much more an issue to be raised come renewal. So you'll be saying, the wage roll or turnover was projected at certain levels. Come renewal, those projected levels, the actual levels are much less. So you're looking for a rebate for what's happened to this point, and then you're going forward with reduced levels. And then the third scenario, I suppose, is the one we hope most clients will not have got to, but where they've effectively gone out of business, or they will not get back into business post-lockdown. Their activity will have ceased, their premises will remain unoccupied, all of their staff will be let go. So there you're still looking at the need for property cover, but now it will be on an unoccupied basis. You'll be noting their activities having ceased. There'll be a rebate for the cancellation of their EL cover and a much reduced PL cover, because you still always have some PL exposure, even if your premises are unoccupied. So as I say, post-lockdown, hopefully for most clients, it's back to business as usual, or the more likely scenario of back to business, but with some change that is essentially now permanent. So we'll be looking to notify. There'll be new projected figures for gross profit, turnover, and wage roll. And the key to what we do, try to negotiate the best possible premium with the new figures. I just thought I'd have a little word about business interruption. It's obviously front of a lot of people's minds. And in fairness, has got a fair bit of bad press. And I suppose it's important to bear in mind that business interruption cover, which is financial cover for the top line, the client's top line, but it originally was drafted to protect or give cover where there was property damage. So all of the claims that have come in the lockdown are actually two extensions of that cover, and essentially where there's no property damage. So people have been trying to get claims paid on the extensions of covers and not on the main provisions. And so typically those extensions have related to infectious disease. There where we were hoping to find COVID as an unspecified infectious disease. Generally speaking, that's happened at the premises or in a defined vicinity. There's also been prevention of access clauses, basically being triggered by the government lockdown, and you have hybrid clauses. And a good example of the hybrid is in fact the FBD case. And as we all know, that case is recent, and FBD are going to have to pay out. But if you look at the wording, you can see why they're paying out. It's as a result of the business being affected by the imposed closure by order of government, so i.e. lockdown, following outbreaks of contagious or infectious disease, i.e. COVID, on the premises or within a 25-mile radius. So you can see there it's very much catching all the elements, and you can see why, despite their best endeavours, FBD are going to pay out. If you compare that with, again, a very recent decision in the last week, 2 weeks or so, by the Irish courts in relation to AXA and the Clarence Hotel in Dublin, that policy wording, they couldn't get COVID in as infectious disease because the wording of the clause was only specified infectious disease. So clearly COVID wasn't on the list, nor could they get COVID in under another disease. And similarly, the prevention of access clause was quite limited to 1 mile. So again, they couldn't get a claim paid under either. Just to know, certainly the central bank is very much keeping some pressure on insurers. We see letters coming now from certain insurers basically saying that, having reviewed the recent decisions and having reviewed their policy wording, that there may be that cover and causation exists for clients effectively to now submit BI claims. What we did for our own clients was certainly, where they were closed, we were certainly notifying claims, even in the knowledge that claims were not going to be met, and had then taken the opportunity now to go back to insurers and basically challenge them to say why it will continue not to be met. But certainly we've had quite a number of the insurers did have the wording for infectious disease at the premises. And so there have been we've handled quite a number of claims where either a staff member got it, and effectively as a result the business had to close, or there was an outbreak on the premises, or even where the owners themselves got infected and therefore had to keep the business closed. So looking at BI, I would very much argue it's very much an essential financial cover, really relating to property damage. In any case, COVID-related claims are now all excluded. Reinsurers are simply not going to go there going forward. And also to mention the increased costs of working. In reality, for most businesses, having that cover in terms of increased costs of working is key to enable clients to set up, because in reality, for most businesses, they're going to have the ability to set up from another location or to adapt what they do. So to be able to protect their top line and to have the cover in terms of their increased costs to enable them to protect the top line. So just to move on, just very finally, just because it's such a significant piece of legislation, is the Consumer Insurance Contracts Act, known as Ceca. This came in last year, and the second half of it comes in with effect from September of this year. And it was essentially addressing the scenarios whereby insurers could repudiate claims and effectively tipping the balance in favour of clients. Just to note that it only relates to consumers, clearly unincorporated, and SMEs with a turnover of less than 3 million. So it's not going to be all of our clients, but it's going to be an awful lot of them. I'm only mentioning just 2 of the key changes because of their legal context. Insurable interest is now gone. It's replaced by a wider need to have an economic interest in the contract. So more than just the insured can potentially claim. Warranties are gone now from the insurance contract, and there are both restrictive conditions and the one I've referred to here as being suspensive conditions, effectively saying that it's only the relevant cover that's suspended while the condition is not being met. So an example would be the condition that your alarm is on. If it's not working and there's a fire or a burglary, that would not be met, but it wouldn't speak to a water damage claim. So that would be an unrelated claim. So where the condition has not been met, it's only suspended while it's not being met. And if a claim occurs in that time, it will not be met. But otherwise, when the condition is then met, cover is back in full. But the key thing to know that's coming from September is essentially, and it's a big change, that the onerous principle of utmost good faith is replaced by a new duty on clients to, And essentially it is to answer the insurer's specific questions, honest, and they still must do it with honesty and with reasonable care. But the key difference is there's no longer this need to volunteer information. So unless the insurer is actually asked the question, that ends it for the client. Even if the question is answered incompletely, it's actually up to the insurer to go back and ask for more information. This particular has been most onerous on insurers. They're having to change their processes, their question sets, their proposal forms, their policy documentation. So what clients are going to see for all policies with effect from 1st of September is that there'll be far more questions, there'll be new forms. As we understand it, there's going to be new forms at every stage. So there'll be question set at quote stage, there'll be a question set when you go and cover, there'll be question sets again if you're amending, there'll be question sets at renewal. So even at renewal with the same insurer, there is going to be question sets. Assumptions will be replaced with questions, and we're anticipating that previous information that's already been given will be asked for again. So it's just something coming down the line. To some extent is going to affect business clients more because generally speaking they're done on the back of statement of facts or proposal forms. So we have yet to see what it will look like, but certainly the question sets are going to become longer, but I suppose with the balance that insurers will have to rely on the questions they've asked and the answers given and nothing more. I hope basically from my summary or from my presentation that to some extent that you'll think a little bit differently. We are very much working with our clients, with our mutual clients on an ongoing basis. A lot of the information that you're dealing with for them, we are also dealing with. So as I say, very much there's a fit between that information. And I hope very much that I've reinforced your view of insurance as very much protecting the client. It's almost a layer of protection sitting behind their financial statements, both in terms of protecting their assets and their balance sheet and their retained earnings, such that if there is a claim, it will be met by the insurance and would otherwise need to be found by the client either out of cash or as an exceptional item in their P&L. So it's very much protecting the client and protecting their financial position. The key takeaway I hope you're taking from lockdown is that it's absolutely critical that clients are notifying us on an ongoing and in particular then when restrictions are lifted and it's back to business in whatever way, they need to be coming back, notifying us again as to how they're going forward. And so that we can make sure the insurers their insurer is absolutely aware, and that we've also readjusted their projected figures, because obviously the premium is rated on their projected figures and their projected turnover and wage roll and so on. And again, business interruption, very much a key insurance. I don't think any client should be without it. And then just as I say, with Ceca coming down the line, there will be more work for us to do with clients in terms of going through the question sets. But that it does mean that once those question sets are dealt with, insurers can only rely on those question sets in terms of dealing with claims. So again, thank you to the Northwest Society. I'm absolutely delighted. I'd like to say I'm very much available at any stage to answer questions. You don't have to be a client. I'm always very happy to give any advice, even wearing my legal hat. So please don't hesitate to contact me at any stage if you'd like to run anything past me. And if there's any questions coming out from the presentation, I'm more than happy to try and answer that.
Yeah, Siobhan, thank you very much. That's loads of food for thought there. I think you've put a lot of ideas into people's heads. So again, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. There's a question there. What changes in insurance arising from COVID-19 should we be aware of, especially in relation to the tourism business?
You mean the hospitality sector?
The hospitality sector, yes.
For sure. Well, again, just as I've highlighted, it's about notifying to what extent it has changed. That's absolutely critical. So you will have a business description under your policy of insurance. And I suppose what we would be saying is we need to relook at that. To what extent has your business description changed? And then I suppose the other key thing is you will have changes in terms of you may not have the same number of staff, you may be operating differently, and so on. And then the piece around what is now your projected wage roll, your projected turnover, because they are the basis on which the premium will be rated. So it's very much about coming back to us. Hopefully you've been engaging during lockdown, because it was important to feed into the insurer what has happened during lockdown for you. But as you come out of lockdown, those are the key information that the insurer will need to know. And it really, that applies regardless of what business you're operating in. It's what has changed for you. Things will have changed during lockdown, and to what extent it's back to business as usual or back to business as usual with changes. So as I say, the business description and your projected figures are key.
Sorry, Siobhan, sorry, Owen here. I just had a quick question about around in that insurance space. Obviously, if you're saying that businesses who have been closed or their business has been amended due to COVID, that they obviously need to look at their policies. But what happens in the scenario where obviously these businesses are distressed and they don't have the access to cash and they actually can't meet, if they don't have the CRSS or they can't meet the premiums that fall due for their insurance? How are insurance dealing with that? Like, are these businesses still insured, or are they, how does that work?
Oh, well, I can assure you they're not insured if they're not paid, and that's an absolute prerequisite.
Okay.
What I would say is, most insurers offer direct debit, right? So there's that option. If you're with some of the niche insurers that don't offer, so certainly all the mainstream insurers will give direct debit. Some of the niche insurers who don't, we do have finance options available through providers, third-party providers, and again that would mean a deposit up front, and then you spread the payment over monthly repayments. So what I would say is, even if you in the past been paying your premium up front, one lump sum, there are options available, and so we can certainly get it with an insurer that does direct debit or get it on premium finance.
Okay, and I only had one other question, sorry, around if anecdotally, I've seen in the marketplace people are like complaining around the delay in getting access to the payments, to the insurance payouts for COVID affected businesses. Is that real, or is that what you're finding on the ground?
Well, to be honest, insurers were holding their cards close to their chest. A lot of them were waiting to see how the court decisions, the FCA decisions were going to run, because interestingly, for most insurers, this was not main cover, and that's the point to make. Lockdown claims came in under extensions of cover, which had just grown over time. They weren't well defined, they weren't well drafted. So suddenly they were looking at these clauses, trying to decide whether claims were in and out. And most of them, their reinsurers were actually saying, hold off until these court decisions come through. And obviously in the Irish context, the main one was the FCA decision. And like the FBD decision, the FCA decision actually defined a lot of the uncertainties. So hence the central bank has, I suppose, kept the pressure on. And so now you'll see a lot of insurers now having to write back out to clients saying, in light of the decisions and the policy wording now being certain and what's included and what isn't. So certainly if clients have got those letters, I'd be saying, go back, you need to submit claims. But we've been quite bullish with insurers. We've made them work for it. If a client has had a loss or they've had a claim, we've gone in, even if we felt the policy wording mightn't speak to it, and again, challenged it post these decisions. So, but certainly if a client is getting a letter, it's time to submit a claim.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and effort put into a very informative webinar. I think everyone will concur on that. And would anyone like a final word or just to wrap it up? And I would like to, on behalf of all the committee, thank you all for attending. Anybody like to say anything, or you're all okay?
Just want to say thanks again, Liz.
Really, no, you're fine with that. Okay.
Really enjoyed
Okay,
it.
well,
Thanks for all the questions.
And just to reiterate, Liz, I'm always very happy to speak to anyone. You don't have to be a client. I'd always like to feel that we're open and available to people who just want to run something past us, so always available.
And we appreciate that. And what we'll do is we'll circulate the slides to everybody that attended today and all of that. So again, thank you very much. You've been brilliant, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And stay safe and enjoy your lunch now. You can enjoy it.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. God bless. Thank you.